SwayamPrabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Welcome to yet another lecture in this course, Philosophy of Architecture. We have seen so far first the definition of architecture, then we have seen an intercultural view of architecture where we focused on Indian and Chinese conception of the discipline, and then we have seen how Western architecture has evolved and how it evolved from the Vitruvian concepts of 10 books and later on Vitruvian triad. We also saw that how Western architecture is pegged on anthropocentrism, which means that it focused on individual as an entity around whom all these structures will be created. Today we are going to look at architecture as an art form. Now, in the last 3 lectures, we have been debating, is it always an art, it is never an art, is it an engineered object, or it is over and above an engineered object, and so on and so forth. So, these discussions we have been having so far. Today we will take a closer look at this question. So, today's title of the lecture is Architecture Always or Never an Art Form? There is an inclusivist view and there is an exclusivist view. Architecture as a critical art form, so not just an art form but also critical art form, a non-representational art form, or architecture as a narrative medium. So, we will look at all these questions in the course of this lecture. Let us move forward. Now, we know that architecture is a material realization of artistic concepts and purposes. Now, material realization of artistic concepts and purposes means what? It means that as an artist, you may have certain concept and you may have some purposes. Now, how do you give a material form to your concepts and purposes? And particularly in architecture, when you give a material form, it means that it takes the form of an architectural object or a built structure. So, we will have to look at architecture from that angle. It is an activity that gives materialistic form to artistic concepts and purposes. Then we must also realize that architecture, the study of architecture, is limited to historical study and aesthetic study, because architecture cannot really be practiced in a studio or in a laboratory. What do? We mix chemicals in the case of chemistry. We use say things like tuning fork in the case of physics. If we are doing painting, then we go to a studio, we have a model, or with imagination we do paintings. But in the case of architecture, we can't really have a studio work, because we cannot build structures in a studio which is of scale. We can only make prototypes and design. So, that is why studio practice is difficult in the case of architecture, and therefore, when we study architecture, we limit our study to aesthetic study and historical study. Another point is architecture as material form as well as socio, psycho, economic, and thereby two broad form as form and meaning. So, architecture is not just material, which is stone and cement and wood and so on, but it also has other components like sociology, psychology, economics, and so on. So, when we combine both, generally we have a dual structure within architecture, and that is form and meaning. And the moment we have form and meaning, we have a study called aesthetics. So, this is how we look at architecture as an art, and now art itself has changed over a period of time. And one of the most important period in human history is the period of Renaissance. And in the Renaissance, and we know some figures of Renaissance like Leonardo da Vinci, which we have recently studied in the previous lecture. So, in the Renaissance, man was considered at the center, and all arts, all architecture, all human effort was centered around man. and how all of these disciplines can provide a stage, a proscenium to man where he can showcase his abilities, his talents, his capabilities, his potential and so on. So, in Renaissance, man was at the center, and therefore all architecture and everything that was built was around man. But then Renaissance was followed by Gothic era, and in the Gothic era the direction or the focus of all artistic effort shifted to heaven or something which is other world, which is not a human world, either heaven or hell or God and so on. So, if you see this sculpture on this slide made by Rodin, the famous sculptor, he called it Gates of Hell, and he was inspired by Milton's Paradise Lost, and he created this sculpture. So, if you look at the other output, the literary, the other artistic output in this period, you will see many of them are talking about heaven and hell and so on. Like Milton's Paradise Lost is a good example. So, the focus itself shifted to heaven, and we have to see how in architecture it got interpreted. Let us see, as I said earlier, that form and meaning. Moment we say form and meaning and we study them together, they become atomic or basic concepts of the study of aesthetics and aesthetic thinking. However, when we see form and meaning in the context of architecture, there is an element that gets added or that defines this study is called space. Now, form and meaning in the context of space or spatiality becomes a continuous factor, and form and meaning as they get interpreted related to space. So, that becomes architecture. Another thing that we must see is space in architecture must be seen, felt and understood as inside out. So, there is an inside space and there is an outside space. Alright. Inside space has certain character, outside space has certain another character. So, outside space often is called facade and inside space is the utilitarian part. But if you see these periods, which is Renaissance, Gothic and modern, you will see how they have treated inside and outside space are very different. In Gothic era and Renaissance era, you will see that inside and outside are more or less similar. Okay. Inside is as decorated as outside. If you go to say church, any Renaissance period church or an old church, for example, St. Paul's Cathedral in Calcutta, you will see that the outside of that church and inside of church, both of them are equally ornate, equally decorated, equally aesthetic. Alright, and you have some examples before you. The first two are examples of Renaissance and Gothic architecture, and the third one is the example of modern architecture. Alright. So, it is important the way we see or understand space in the field of architecture. They have to be understood both inside and outside, and not just seen, felt and understood. Another aspect is to enclose and define larger, freer spaces and open them up to light and air. And all of this has to be done in the way that form and meaning become a part of the exercise and become a part of the architectural object itself. So, to enclose and define larger, freer spaces and open them up to light and air. So, this does not mean only about domestic spaces, but it is also about public spaces, public works, for example, church, for example, public buildings, for example, parks and gardens and larger buildings where large number of people come and work. So, how light and air is used and how they are allowed inside or prevented from entering the building is also something that architects deal with, and deal with in a way that it stands for something beautiful and creates an aesthetic experience. So, therefore, what they try to achieve is an interpenetration of inner and outer space, interpenetration. So, how inner space extends itself into outer space and how outer space shows itself to be a derivative of inner space. So, this interpenetration is something that architects keep thinking of very consciously in the terms of form and meaning, and therefore create an aesthetic experience. So finally, you can see that Gothic, Baroque and modern epochs. So these are the three epochs, and how they dealt with this interpenetration of inside and outside space is something that we can see in these three examples. Let us move forward. So architecture as an art form. Is it never an art form or is it always an art form? This is a question that all of us must think about carefully, deeply, and particularly you see, suppose you look at your own house. Your house, is it here? Do we really look at our house as an artistic creation? Perhaps maybe some objects inside the house we may look at as an art form or as an artistic object. But do we really see the whole house as an art form? Perhaps no. Then when we look at, say, a nearby temple or a church, if it is an old building, perhaps we will look at it as an architectural art form. So this whole continuum, where do you think architectural objects, where do they locate themselves? Of course, it depends on which building you are thinking of, but generally, is it never an art form or is it always an art form? And if it is never an art form, what is it? Is it an engineered artifact? It is actually an artwork which is bounded by space. This is something that we have to think about while we are studying architecture as an art form. Let us move further. Nature and distinction with other art forms. So, okay, architecture is an art form. Suppose we say that yes, architecture can be thought of as an art form, but then what is its nature? If it is an art form, what kind of art form is it? And how does it differ from other art forms? So, for example, how does it differ from painting? How does it differ from singing? How does it differ from say drama and so on? Alright, so let us have a discussion on how does it relate to other art forms and how is it different from other art forms. So, architecture is a non-representational art form. Now, what does it mean when we say non-representational art form? It means, and many people say, that a non-representational art form means that it does not have any content. It is only a structure, it is only hollow form. It does not have content. Now, there is a debate within the architectural circles that does architecture convey any content? Does it have any content to convey or does it not have any content to convey? Because essentially architecture is a bound space, and does it really have any content? The content in the sense of poetry. So, when we say Lucy poem of Wordsworth or To Be or Not to Be of Hamlet, so they all say something, there is content in that. But in a building, do you really have any content? So, there is a discussion among architects that whether architecture is a non-representational art form, which means that it does not convey any content. Some architects say yes, it does have some content which it conveys through form, but otherwise generally they say that architecture per se does not have content to convey. The next point is critical art form. Now, what is a critical art form? It says that it does not tolerate creators' detached stance from the environment. Alright, now what does it mean that it does not tolerate creators' detached stance from the environment? This means that architecture, now architecture is a building and building is for certain purpose. Now, if architect takes a detached view that it does not matter where the building is, it does not matter who it is for, it does not matter what the purpose it is for, and I will create a building simply because I want to create it in a certain way. So, architecture will not tolerate such a detached stance of the architect, because then it will be of no use, because architecture, the building is of for a certain purpose, and if a creator or the architect is not aligned to that purpose, then it is not really architecture. So, it is a critical art form in the sense that it does not tolerate architects' detached stance from the environment. It takes, for example, music. Now, whether you are playing music in a house or in a stage or in the morning or at night, it does not matter so much. It doesn't matter to people, it doesn't matter so much to your surroundings, whether how you are playing, what you are playing and so on. Similarly, if you are making a painting, it does not matter so much to the people and your circumstances and surroundings what you are painting and how you are painting. Whereas in the case of architecture, it does matter. Architects do need to interact with the environment while making the building. Second is narrative medium and can communicate a sequence of events. So, architecture is a narrative medium. Why is it a narrative medium, and what do you mean by being a narrative medium? It means that it has a story to tell. All right. And that story, how does that story happen? It happens because within the precincts of architecture, precincts of the building, people are able to move. So, people move from one building to another building, people move from one floor to another floor, and while moving they are able to interact each other, they are able to do something or not do something and do it in a certain way. Certain kind of activities they can do, certain activities they cannot do, and it happens over a long period of time. So, what I am trying to say is that architecture becomes in this narrative medium in the sense that it narrates a story, it narrates a sequence of event, and it communicates by its form and the way it conducts its form. So, it is a critical art form in the sense that it does not tolerate architects' detached stance, and it is able to tell a story by the movement of people and people's emotions. One example I wanted to give was this structure that you can see on the slide, and this is of Guggenheim Museum in New York. This museum was designed by Frank Lloyd Wright, the famous architect about whom I have told you earlier, and this building was completed in 1959. This is a museum, this is an art museum, in fact it is a modern art museum. And you see the kind of rounded structure, the spiraling kind of structure that it is, and when it was created, many people laughed at it and they thought this is very funny and even ugly. But now it is considered as one of the classic architectural wonders created by Frank Lloyd Wright. You know, Frank Lloyd Wright is known for organic design or organic architecture. So, when he designed it, he thought of it as an organic design in an urban setting. So, it is right in the center of New York City. All right, and it is in the shape of a spiral. So, it is like a ramp on which you can go gradually up or you can come gradually down. In fact, you can even go by on a wheelchair, and in the process you have many artifacts that are displayed. Look at them, that you can watch over while you are going up or you are coming down. So, what Frank Lloyd Wright thought was he will create a new way of looking at modern art, and that is how he imagined this design which he created, and then it took long time, almost 10-12 years it took to make this building. And today he imagined it as a temple of spirit, okay, and it is also imagined as inverted ziggurat. Now, ziggurat is a kind of structure in Mesopotamia which was like a temple. So, inverted ziggurat, all right. So, many people think of it as ziggurat inspired from Mesopotamia, which is, Mesopotamia means something like Iran, Iraq. All right. So, many people think that it was inspired by ziggurat of Mesopotamia. In fact, Frank Lloyd Wright called it as archeesium. Instead of calling it architecture or museum, he combined two words, architecture and museum, and he called it archeesium, a building in which you see the highest possible that you can see, you are able to see in this building. So, what I am trying to say is that architecture as an art form can take these shapes. Let us move forward. Now, you know, of course, there are architectural objects and there are built structures, there is material reality around architecture, but we cannot ignore that the role of technology and how it is leading to dematerializing built structures or concrete realities. When we say dematerializing, it means that it is no longer material, it is abstract, it comes and goes, it is like a light, it is like something which appears and then it disappears. So, and all of it supported by technology. So, recent advances in technology necessitate new methods of imaging in architectural production. So, when architects are producing new objects or new images in architectural production, what they do is they use technology, and through technology they are making new forms of architecture. So, for example, dematerialization of art object has increased focus on process and context, which means that because of technology we are able to dematerialize. So, if the end object is not really a material, if it is not an object that can be touched and felt, then what it is? And that is how the importance of process and importance of context came into being. So, artists and architects have started focusing on process and they have started focusing on context, which means that they are presenting process itself as art and they are presenting context as art. So, that kind of architectural construction or images in architecture are being presented. So, therefore, we must look at how really we have thought of art itself as art and what constitutes art, what is art. And as we have progressed, we have defined art differently. In 1960s, the conclusion was, so when the thinking about art was going on, in 1960s thought and the theories say that most intrinsic to art is not its object status, but inherent cognitive concept. Alright. So, it means that what really defines art as art is not so much that it is an object that can be touched and felt, but what is the concept that is inside that object. Alright. So, for example, there is a movie. Now, there are good movies and there are bad movies. Now, a good movie is an art form, is an artistic object if the inherent cognitive concept is the intrinsic cognitive concept in that movie is substantial, is artistic, is beautiful, and then that movie is artistic. Otherwise, it is not an artistic movie, it is a commercial movie. So, what I am trying to say is that the cognitive concept that resides inside the object becomes the determinant of whether an object is art or it is non-art. Another aspect was open-ended exploratory process of expressing concepts. Now, you in the sense artist or architect want to express certain concept, and how does he express that concept? Does he express through an exploratory process? So, I can express it this way, I can also express it in another way. So, there is a tentative nature of expression or exploration. There is an exploration about it, that this way or that way. There is an uncertainty about how the concept will be expressed. That also becomes a part of how art is defined. Finally, architectural expression operates at multiple levels. So, it was recognized that architecture, while cognition and dematerialization and exploratory ways, all that is important, but we must remember that architectural expression does operate at multiple levels, and those multiple levels are materiality, which means there is a touch and feel element to it. Then there is a process. So, that process cannot be ignored, how that material is given a form and that form is used to communicate a meaning. So, all that is done through a process. So, that process cannot be ignored. In fact, if possible, that process must be expressed. And then there is a larger cultural and biological system in which the architecture takes place or architectural object gets created. So, architectural expression does operate at these three levels: materiality, process and larger cultural and biological system. Let us move forward. We must not forget that architecture exists simultaneously in fixed, static and timeless modes. Now, what does it mean? Architecture is a building and building is fixed. I mean, today this building is here, tomorrow we cannot take it somewhere else. So, building is fixed and static, it remains at one place and it is unchanging. Static means if building is of white color, tomorrow also it will remain white in color, it will not change its color automatically, and it is timeless. So, over a long period of time it remains fixed, static and timeless. So, this is an element of architecture that cannot be missed. Then as we moved, we also saw in earlier lecture, we studied Vitruvian triad of beauty, utility and strength. So, as we move forward with technology and with newer forms of architecture, this Vitruvian triad of beauty, utility and strength were replaced by another triad, and that was functionality, purity and machine aesthetic, particularly given by architect called Le Corbusier. If you remember, Le Corbusier is someone who had said that a house is a machine for living in. So, it is the same Le Corbusier who has given a new triad which replaced the earlier Vitruvian triad, and the new triad is functionality, purity and machine aesthetic. Post World War II, and all of us remember World War II ended in 1945, and after that since there was a huge massive destruction all over the world, the whole world was rebuilding itself. And there was a massive requirement for construction of housing and buildings and offices and so on. So much of construction was happening because economy was expanding, and therefore everything had to be done fast, and to do fast in an efficient way at lower cost. So, the focus was on functionality and standardization. If you can standardize, then you can do faster, because if it has to be done in a same way at different places, once you make the design and you have standardized it, without your being present, without the architect being present at multiple places, the construction can go on simultaneously. So, to do that, focus was on functionality and standardization, and therefore, the interest in creating unique pieces of architecture, singular pieces of architecture was less, and therefore, you will see that all the construction that has happened post World War II, large number of them are standardized and similar architecture, which has in some sense moved away from unique architecture and moved towards the machine aesthetic of Le Corbusier. In fact, that was the time when one interesting idea came, which I wanted to share with you, was the idea of an endless house. And this was the idea of an architect called Friedrich Kiesler. And the idea of endless house, I have given the picture in this slide. You can see that there is a model of endless house, and this model was displayed in Museum of Modern Art in New York, and later on someone tried to make a digital possibility of how this building, this house, endless house will actually look like. And on the right hand side you can see that how, if realized in real life, this is how the construction will take place. So, this is a fantastic idea of an endless house, about which we will study a little in detail, and you can see this drawings of endless house created by Friedrich Kiesler. He exhibited these drawings and the prototype of endless house in Museum of Modern Art in 1964. And this is something that is worth paying attention. This seems a little odd, the kind of house that he is presenting in this idea called endless house. But according to him, this design is based on connectivity, correlation and biotechnique. Okay, so it says that human being is a biological entity, and the life, the building, the house where he lives in, it should treat him as a biological entity, an organic entity, and it should treat him as an organism that relates to other organisms. That is why this building is based on connectivity, correlation and biotechnique. Then you can see that this structure is elevated on 4 broad pillars. They are also called pilotis. So, 4 broad pillars on which the whole structure is raised, and there are 2 staircases. You have seen here this kind of staircase. So, there are 2 staircases that either lead you to the ground or they lead you to the building. And then the layout includes a kitchen, a dining room, a living room, a parent's bedroom, children's bedroom and a space for seclusion. The windows punctuate the design and are made of semi-transparent plastic. Different types of flooring throughout the glass, which include sand, grass, terracotta tiles and pebbles. And the design is biomorphic. It is intended to create an organic space rather than a geometric or a linear one. So, essentially what this design is trying to say is, it is making those who live in this house exposed to different ways of, or different texture, different material, different way of interacting with each other, and then it has thought about separate rooms, and each room has a different design. I mean, here you cannot see, but if you Google and if you study this concept in detail, you will see that how a child's room is different from parents' bedroom, and then a living room, and then there is a space for seclusion. So, this is an idea worth studying in detail as to how an idea of an endless means what? Endless life, or endless engagement with the world, or endless engagement with oneself, or endless engagement with people around you. It can be interpreted in whichever way you want, and how the structure where you live can facilitate this endless engagement with oneself and with each other and with the environment. So, this is how the idea of endless house has got translated or interpreted into the form of an architectural object. Some similar examples where ideas are getting interpreted. For example, how it is getting interpreted because of the changes in the definition of art. So, in this case, what you see is called an Eden pavilion. And this Eden pavilion, you can see it is fairly organic. It looks like it is blending into the garden of this house, and it does not really stand out. It does not look like it has been imposed or it is artificial and so on. And in fact, it was inspired by the weathering process of lichen. All right, you can see the green roof, and how it is green means the moss has entered, and then moss is maturing itself on because of the rain and the sunshine and so on and so forth. So, this Eden pavilion is a garden structure, and it is thought of as a living, evolving, generative canopy inspired by weathering process of lichen. All right. So, this is a response to changes in the definition of art, and architects therefore, what did they do? Architects started collaborating with designers. So, while they were making the design for the building, they said, why do not we invite designers to be a part of this creation process, and then collaborate and then design something new and different. So, that is what the architects began doing, and then we had results nature. So, the projects begin with a form of non-directed questioning, which means that straight away the architect will not say that this is how the building will look like. He will say, let us see how, if this is our objective, how can we create a building. So, they do not start with a fixed end result, they start with an indirect questioning. So, what is inspiring us, or do we make a generative structure, or do we make a fixed structure, and so on. And while doing it, they do not presume that how the building ought to look like. Right in the beginning, they will not say this is how the building should look like. They will not say that. In the process, if they are collaborating with others, they will together discuss and arrive at some kind of idea and some kind of form. And this is a good example of that Eden pavilion. So, in this Eden pavilion, the expression of Eden pavilion is one that encompasses temporality and interactions with sun, fog or rain. So, because it is a garden kind of structure, it is out in the open, it interacts with sun, it interacts with fog, rain and so on and so forth. And therefore, it is a living, evolving and generative structure. Let us move forward. So, as technology became more and more invasive and it started overwhelming various disciplines, as we said, the process art, which means the process itself is an art. How you do it and how it is being done, that itself was presented as art, even in architecture. So, process art and art plus technology. So, one is process art, the way things are happening, can that itself be an art, and art plus technology. So, how both can be combined and expressed as architecture. And this happened because later on economic recession happened, and because of economic recession, the number of buildings that were commissioned, the kind of money that was available for construction was less, and therefore the architects were thinking, now what do we do? If we do not get to build buildings, if we do not have projects on which we can work and create structures, if we don't have all that, then what do we do? So they started contributing or creating process art and art plus technology. So newer forms of architectural expressions developed, and one of the example is on your screen. This is called soft cell. All right, and it was created by an architects Cofidio and Renfro. It was done in 1993, and it was at the entrance of Rialto Theatre in the Times Square, New York. What it is quite interesting. If you can see the image, when the visitors to this theatre came, this was actually a closed theatre, and then they were met by this giant size screen. On the screen there was an attractive girl's lips, her mouth, slightly open mouth, and she was attractively, and she was saying, hey you, are you interested in buying this, or are you interested in buying that? And this way she continues, are you interested in buying happiness, are you interested in buying time of your life, are you interested in buying a good girlfriend or a boyfriend? And this continues speaking, and she continues speaking for almost 3 minutes. And people were taken aback as to the seductive way that she was. And what you could see in the screen was just this lady and her mouth and her voice charmingly inviting people to buy a time of their life and various options. So this was installation. It is also called installation in architectural and design parlance. So it was an installation created by the two architects, Cofidio and Renfro, in 1993. What I am trying to say is architecture as an art form has, the idea of architecture as an art form has developed and has gone into different ways of expression. And it is not just architectural object which is a built structure, but it is also process art and art plus technology. So both of them are combining or getting combined by architects and creating new forms of architectural expression. Something similar is a delay in glass by Marcel Duchamp. Those of you who are interested, you can Google this item, you will know what it is. Let us move forward. So architectural expression becomes more conceptual. It was always conceptual. Concept has been a part of architecture. So right from the beginning we are seeing that architecture is theory plus form and plus ideas. So all those have always been there, but with this role of technology and the role of process art becoming important, architectural expressions are becoming more and more conceptual. All right. So today each architect will first say what it means and then he will actually make something. So it is becoming more conceptual. Then materiality is getting replaced by ephemeral, which means that of course you have material structure, that there is a building and so on, but that over and above that materiality there is another element which is ephemeral, which means that maybe play of light or play of technology by which the building will change its appearance and so on. So materiality is being not only replaced but complemented by ephemeral elements, which is making architectural expression more varied and more conceptual. Contextuality foregrounded in the perception of architecture. So contextuality means when an architectural object is being created, it is not away or it is not divorced from the context, and that context in that architectural expression is embedded. So you know that this building or this architectural object belongs to this context, which means if it is an NGO, you will know that it is an NGO. For example, you may have seen that the headquarters of fisheries organization in Hyderabad actually looks like a fish. So what I am trying to say is that this contextuality is becoming more and more important. The building which is in the form of a fish and the building which is actually a headquarters of the fisheries organization. So this way contextuality is getting foregrounded in architectural expression. And therefore, architectural experience within a larger social and cultural system must be, I mean, this is a need that architects are recognizing, that architectural experience must be within a larger social and cultural system. And then there is an element which is critical theory. Critical theory is a discipline that has developed in 1930s and 40s, and critical theory, it's an offshoot in philosophy, and it tries to relook at Marxism and how the way Marxism has got implemented and the way it has lost its relevance today. Critical theory is trying to revisit Marxism, and it is trying to unearth various forces that has helped or hindered the interpretation of Marxism. So, critical theory has also looked at critically various architectural expressions, the formation of cities, the buildings, and the way buildings are created, and how the power play is, it can be seen behind the construction of the buildings and cities, how it is leading to exclusion of masses, and it is made more for the richer and the elites. So, what critical theory has done, it has removed those layers and it has made it bare. It has uncovered various forces that has. So, when we look at a building, we see that it is an innocent structure and it is a simple beautiful structure on which people, where people work and do things. But critical theory has looked at it deeply, and it has said that no, it is not so simple. It has been done with some ulterior motive so that some people cannot enter and only a certain kind of people can enter and do their work. So, critical theory has removed surface layers of materiality from these expressions. It has also exposed invisible forces operating on form, emerging from intricate network of social and economic relationships. So, forces that were invisible, forces that were hideous, forces that were emerging from power centers. Those forces were invisible earlier. Now, critical theory has exposed those invisible forces, and they have bared this intricate network of social and economic relationships which we were not privy to earlier. So, critical theory has also played a role in making architecture or exposing architecture, the influences on architecture that generally people were not aware of. So, architectural modes of thinking, we can come and make a summary of it, that architectural modes of thinking broadly now has three streams. One is art povera, which is art for poor, which means that it does not require a lot of money. It can be vernacular architecture, it can be not very expensive, not something that has to have huge resources of government or philanthropy, etc. It can be done with less resources. So, art povera is one mode of architectural thinking, and then the two that I have already mentioned, process art, where the way of doing things itself becomes an example of architectural expression, and then finally art and technology, how art and technology come together to create architectural object. So, we have reached towards the end of this lecture where we are looking at architecture, is it always an art and never an art? We come to the end where we ask this question once again, that does architecture include all built structures? And it is a derivative of that question, it is never an art and always an art, and if it is a built structure, is it an art? So, if this is the question, does architecture include all built structures? There is an inclusivist conception and there is an exclusivist conception. What is an inclusivist conception? Inclusivist conception says that the whole of built environment as a broader creative medium. Anything that is built, anything that has a structure, that has touch and feel, and that has dwelling, that promotes or promises dwelling in some sense, is a built structure, and it is included in architecture. So, the whole of built environment is architecture, all right, and therefore, the whole of built environment is a broad creative medium where you can apply your creativity, your artistic ability. Recognition of the training and ethos attached to creator of architectural objects. So, inclusivist conception also recognizes that to make this, you need to have training. Anybody and everybody cannot make built structures, cannot make architectural objects. You need training to create architectural objects, and you also need certain ethos, certain way of doing things which are in the realm of do's and don'ts. So, ethos, ethics and ethos that emerges from the practices that have evolved over last hundreds and thousands of years. So, the person who is engaged in making architectural objects must be rooted in certain ethos of that discipline. So, there is an inclusivist conception and then there is an exclusivist conception. Exclusivist conception means that it excludes certain things. Only coherent subset of the whole built. So, the entire built environment is not architecture, only a subset and a coherent subset architecture, and only such built structures will be considered as architecture that people can occupy. Only if people can occupy, it will become a subset of built environment, and some of them can be considered as architecture. And then exclusivist conception also says that there must be an intention to generate art. So, architect who is working on build structure, he must be working with the intention to generate art. The intention must be that I will generate an artistic object. Now, let us see this Guggenheim Museum. This Guggenheim Museum, when Frank Lloyd Wright was given this commission that you must create a museum design and so on. So, you see what he is saying. He is saying that I want to create a building that will be a new way of looking at modern art. It will be a temple of spirit. Alright, so his objectives are very clear. His objectives are, I will construct a new way of looking at modern art. I will construct a temple of spirit. Alright, and I am creating an organic design in an urban setting. Alright, so what I am trying to say is, if you look at the last point, intention to generate art. So, Frank Lloyd Wright had very clear intention to generate art with specific intent to exalt. Now, what is specific intent to exalt? Specific intent to exalt is that it is a temple of spirit. It is not a ordinary objective or a purpose. It is a grand purpose that I am creating a temple of spirit. I am creating new ways of looking at modern art. Alright. So, it is not really something simple. It is a clear intention of creating art. When he is giving the name Archesium, he is creating a new category itself. He is not just creating another museum. He is not just creating another architectural object. He is fusing the two. He is fusing not just two categories. He is fusing two disciplines, discipline of architecture and discipline of museum. When the two disciplines get fused, what does he make of? What does it become? It becomes a building in which one can see the highest. And what is that highest? Highest is, what can you see which is highest? Often we say God, that God is something that we cannot see. So, therefore, when we see a building where we can see the highest, perhaps he means that a building where we can see God. So, what I am trying to say is, let us look at the last one, specific intent to exalt. So, unless there is a specific intent to exalt, it will not become an architecture per exclusivist conception. So, therefore, what we are saying is that architecture has an inclusivist conception where we say that everything is architecture, all built structures can be considered as architecture, and as far as it is being made by people who have received training and who have certain ethos that is associated with architecture discipline. And then there is exclusivist conception which says no, everything cannot be architecture, only a coherent small subset of the built environment can be considered architecture, and particularly it is being made by people who had a clear intention to generate art and generate art with specific intent to exalt. So, the purpose should be grand, purpose must be exaltation, that something grand, something edifying and so on, only then it can be considered as architecture, and otherwise it cannot be considered architecture. So, this is what we have done today. Today we have dealt with this question, is architecture always or never an art form? And here we have not just discussed inclusivist and exclusivist view, we have also seen different forms of art that can be interpreted in the context of architecture. We have also seen, because of the advent of technology, how the discipline is changing and how new forms of architectural thinking has emerged, which is process as art and art plus technology as also another way of thinking about architecture. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed the session.